Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 4 results. So we have the results for Week 4 then, and it's been a very interesting week at the Revention Music Center in Houston. So we've seen an incredible amount. We've seen big sweeps, we've seen ups and downs for certain teams, and we've seen 2 map fights from the same team as well. And I really think this Atlantic division is really starting to shape up now in terms of where these teams perhaps should be at, where we think they are at right now. Now we've had so many games during this season. So without further ado, let's go through these results. And we started off on Saturday, February the 29th with New York Excelsior taking on the Florida Mayhem. So I bigged up the Florida Mayhem in the preview video for this because I really thought they could get something out of this game if they played well. But what was in New York Excelsior's favour is that it was their only match this week, so they could concentrate wholly and solely on that, and it showed. New York came into this a different looking sort of team. We see Nene and Libero come back in instead of Who Are You and SBB at times, and it makes a big difference for this team, and you see it. They were very well organised. They came into this with a set game plan, and they executed it to perfection. The Mayhem did not know what to do with the New York Excelsior, and it shows in the scoreline as well. A 3-0 win for the New York Excelsior. Very comprehensive for New York in this one. And this is the sort of thing we want to see from New York if they want to be at the top of that league. It was a very off week for New York last week, and they needed to bounce back with a comprehensive look like this. And I think now this really does tell us that the way forward for the New York Excelsior is Nene and Libero. That is the look for the New York Excelsior DPS that is working right now. It's worked so perfectly against the Florida Mayhem. They shouldn't really be changing it from here on in. But again, you could change it depending on the team you're facing. So New York, that's a very good win for them. And we will see where they go with that. Florida Mayhem, I wouldn't be too upset about it. It's New York. You won't expect it to win, let's be honest. Now, moving on to Toronto Defiant taking on the Atlanta Reign then. The first time we would see Atlanta Reign during this season. Toronto Defiant, I didn't know what to make of them. They took the Philadelphia Fusion really close last week. And all of a sudden we're thinking, Toronto, could they be this team that are the surprise package this season? But then, here come the Atlanta Reign. And they walk over the Toronto Defiant. And it wasn't close. It was brutal. It was really brutal. A 3-0 win for the Atlanta Reign. They came into this very well prepared. They came in with a given strat, double main tank. They played Dogman on the Batiste, I believe, and they played a bit of Brig as well, and they just tore apart the Toronto Defiant. Toronto Defiant did not have a game plan to respond to the Atlanta Reign, and they were just... It was a massive body blow for the Toronto Defiant. And they never ever recovered. Atlanta Reign looked very good in this game, but their tougher test was later on during the weekend. So, moving on to the London Spitfire taking on the Houston Outlaws then. Now, London Spitfire, this is a must-win game for them. This is absolutely a must-win game for them. It's the sort of game they really need to put to bed if they want to be that sort of play-in sort of area. I'm not looking at London Spitfire being playoff contenders, although they have the potential at the moment, but they are certainly looking for that play-in spot, and to get that, you need to be beating people like Houston Outlaws. And they get the win, but it's rough. It's a 3-2 win for the London Spitfire, and they go 2-0 up, and we think, well, London are going to get their first sweep of the season. And all of a sudden, Houston Outlaws came back into it, and once they got their first map win in the series, the crowd gets behind them, and all of a sudden it gets very close and very nail-bitey for the London Spitfire. But they squeeze out that map 5 win and get the win they need to be getting over the Houston Outlaws to take them to another win this season after their close win over the Washington Justice last week. So, moving on to the Sunday then, and we saw the Boston Uprising kick off against the Philadelphia Fusion. Again, we did not expect much from this match. We know the capability of this Philadelphia Fusion squad right now. And the Boston Uprising, they cannot match that, no matter what they do. Fusions was on the main tank for Boston Uprising. He was missing in action. Sado, again, was really great for the Philadelphia Fusion. The whole of Philadelphia Fusion were great. But the really good thing we got to see in this match is we got to see Fury and we got to see EQO. and they were very good. They were very, very good, and it shows the massive squad depth and massive skill depth that the Philadelphia Fusion have. It is bordering on scary what this Fusion squad can do right now, and the only test that remains for the Philadelphia Fusion is if they get a loss, how do they bounce back from that? That's the only question I have for the Philadelphia Fusion right now, because at the moment they are ticking all the boxes. And it's a phenomenal look for the Philadelphia Fusion right now. This is looking like a much better Philadelphia Fusion than we even saw in the inaugural season. And they got to the grand final. So, big ups on the Philadelphia Fusion right now. Moving on though, we saw the Paris Eternal taking on the Atlanta Reign. Now, this was the tougher test for the Atlanta Reign this week after taking on Toronto Defiant. They passed the Toronto Defiant test with flying colours, and all of a sudden we're saying, we have a challenger to the Philadelphia Fusion here. The challenger that New York Excelsior couldn't be. But the Paris Eternal have something to say about that. Paris Eternal looked brilliant during this match. They really, really did. Atlanta Reign didn't. Atlanta Reign looked out of sorts, did not know how to cope with the Paris Eternal, and it ends up in a 3-1 win for the Paris Eternal. Shock of the weekend. Arguably. There's another one coming up a little later on. Paris Eternal, this look that Paris Eternal came out with for against the Atlanta Reign, honestly, Paris could be up there. They are looking like a really good team. And that early loss to Toronto in the first week is now looking like a blip. It is looking like a blip. I don't think this Paris Eternal will drop that again. Remember, in that first week, they didn't have Hanbin. Hanbin is a massive addition to this Paris Eternal squad. And I am very interested to see where this Paris Eternal squad matches up against Philadelphia Fusion. They've dealt with the Atlanta Reign, which is arguably a big test, although Atlanta Reign unknown coming into this week, obviously. Philadelphia Fusion, we know what they are. Can Paris Eternal make a game of it against the Fusion? That game is coming up very soon, so that's going to be an interesting one to take a look at. And Atlanta Reign, that is not the start you wanted. You wanted to go 2-0 this week. You were bigged up as one of the top 3 in this league this season. And with that result, there are a lot of question marks over that. A lot of question marks. But moving on, London Spitfire in action again against the Florida Mayhem. So London coming off the back of a narrow win against the Houston Outlaws. Florida Mayhem coming off the back of the absolute battering by the New York Excelsior. And both teams needed a win. London Spitfire, they are going to be that team this season. That team that, and the casters were saying it, they give you hope. They give the opposition hope. And then they cruelly snatch it away from you. So, London Spitfire, Florida Mayhem, very, very, very close game. A lot of these maps were 99-99, or they were very close payload pushes. They were very, very close maps. And Horizon and the Colony went 4-3 to the Florida Mayhem. Like, this was close. London Spitfire, though, they had the clutch to Seattle Havana. And it went 2-2, and obviously we went to Oasis. And London Spitfire, at the moment, have not lost a map 5. And it continues because they get a 3-2 win over the Florida Mayhem. London Spitfire are looking like, at the moment, our map 5 specialist in this season right now. Now, we have to remember we haven't seen the Pacific East Division yet, so early days. But London Spitfire, every single win they've got has come on a map 5. And it's not the look you want, because you wanted to sweep the Houston Outlaws. And I didn't actually expect London to beat Florida. I thought Florida might actually just edge it. But in the end, London edged it. It was a very close match, but it became a bit more swaying towards the London Spitfire's favour on Oasis, the last map. But we wouldn't have said that a year ago. Remember, Oasis used to be a horror map for the London Spitfire, especially that old squad. But London Spitfire clutched out on that last map and get a 3-2 victory over the Florida Mayhem. And they get the wins they need this week. And it is crucial that London Spitfire, no matter how they did it, went 2-0 this week. Because they don't feature again until week 6. And in week 6, they play Philadelphia and Atlanta. I am not expecting London Spitfire to get anything from that week unless Atlanta capitulate next week. But good show from the London Spitfire. And if there's one game you want to go and watch, I would recommend that game. Because that was so close. So close. And it was hectic Overwatch as well. If you're looking for really, really perfect Overwatch, Paris versus Atlanta was a really good show. But we have one more game to take a look at. Toronto Defiant taking on the Houston Outlaws. So, Houston Outlaws came into this on 0-5, having lost their first game at this homestand against the London Spitfire in a very narrow and agonising fashion. Toronto Defiant coming in off that body blow of the massive 3-0 loss to the Atlanta Reign, and a game that wasn't close, which is never a nice feeling. And then you've got to go up against the homestand boys, so it's never nice. And there was this big, big up before the match. Jake got his number/jersey retired, and got all the Houston fans cheering. Toronto come into this, and yeah, this is a very, very interesting game. So this is a game where if you want to see teams run non-meta comp, this is the game to watch it. Because a lot of this game was played with Hackfist. This is Sombra, and this is Doomfist. Something that Toronto Defiant really like playing. Atlanta Reign shut it down really well. Houston Outlaws, they've been trying to play meta. It hadn't been working. It really hadn't been working. So, they start the meta on the first map. Toronto get their first control map win of the season. So, that tells you everything. And then, all of a sudden, Houston get drawn into the Toronto Defiance game. The Hackfist dive. And Muma gets to go to the Winston. He looks much better on the Winston than he does on the Reinhardt. All of a sudden, Outlaws are getting some traction in the series. They get a win on King's Row. They get actually a comprehensive win on Horizon Lunar Colony. All of a sudden, Houston Outlaws are 2-1 up in the series. Toronto Defiant are wobbling. Big time. And this is with Shore4 in the lineup. So, this is Toronto Defiant's best roster. And they are wobbling big time. They don't know what to do. And off the back of that big demoralizing loss to the Atlanta Reign, it looked Houston were dominating this series at this point after the Horizon Lunar Colony map. And they get the 3-1 victory. Houston Outlaws are on the board with their first win of the 2020 season, a 3-1 victory over the Toronto Defiant. This has been an appalling week from a Toronto Defiant point of view. Everyone expected Toronto Defiant, well, everyone apart from Zoe, who wasn't there this week, expected Toronto Defiant to pretty comprehensively get past the Outlaws. I kind of expected it to be a 3-0. I thought the Outlaws might get one map. It's nice to see the Outlaws. We've seen Lynx are back now. He's playing alongside Hydration when they play meta, which is not their strongest look. But when they go to that Hackfist, it's Blase and it's Dante. Dante's a really good Sombra, and Blase's Doomfist carries. Like, we've been criticising Blase in the past couple of weeks for his McCree play. Don't play him on McCree. Houston, for goodness sake, just play Hackfist, play Blase on Doomfist, and play Dante on Sombra. You will get wins. You may not be a playoff team, you may not even be a play-in team, but you certainly won't be going with a win this season. Because what we saw from this game was Houston Outlaws outplaying Toronto Defiant. This wasn't just Toronto had this injury or this illness or whatever. This was just purely Houston Outlaws outplaying the Toronto Defiant. And it's very interesting, and it's put a lot of question marks over the Toronto Defiant now. A lot of question marks. And they really need to bounce back when they play next, because that has been an atrocious week for Toronto. Toronto have to bounce back against Florida and Washington next week. Otherwise, it could be a bad run coming up for Toronto. But let's take a look at our standings. As you would expect, Philadelphia Fusion still top our rankings at number 1 with that 5-0, no losses on the board, plus 11 differential. Of course, they are still ahead of the Vancouver Titans and San Francisco Shock, the only two other unbeaten teams right now. Obviously, they haven't featured since week 1, and we don't call the Pacific East teams unbeaten because they haven't played yet. But hopefully, we'll get to see them play very soon. The San Francisco Shock homestand, I think, is week 8. I want to say week 8. And that's when we'll see the Pacific Division in action again. Hopefully we'll get some news on the rearrangement of these Chinese games as well and the Korean games, because we want to see these teams in action. They're all joint 14th at the moment, and it's a bit frustrating not to see these cool teams in action. But New York Excelsior in 4th, getting that win over the Florida Mayhem, a much needed bounce back after their first loss last week. Paris Eternal are up to 5th and challenging the New York Excelsior. That'll be an interesting game. New York Excelsior taking on Paris Eternal. London Spitfire are up to 6th now, and I think London Spitfire are looking like perhaps a gateway team between the play-ins, the higher echelons, and the lower echelons. It's easier to explain in the Atlantic division, which I'll go through in a minute. Atlanta Reign are in 7th right now. Again, it's still early days for this Reign squad, but it's a really nasty L to take against Paris Eternal. Valiant in 8th now as well. Boston Uprising are in 9th. They're not suffering too badly, but they've only played 3 games, and Boston Uprising I still don't think are quite there. Washington 10th. Toronto down to 11th now. Florida down to equal 11th with Toronto as well. Houston in 13th. They are now off that 0-win record, so they're up to 13th instead of propping up the league. Obviously in joint 14th we have Chengdu, Hangzhou, Guangzhou, Shanghai and Seoul, all haven't played yet. And then in 19th we have the Los Angeles Gladiators. They've only played 1 game this season in the first week. And then the Dallas Fuel are currently propping up the league with only 2 games on the board, both of them being losses. Again, this will change. I still think Houston will prop up the league in the end unless they can continue playing that Blase Dante Hackfist combo. But it's not to be harsh on Dallas and Los Angeles Gladiators. They just haven't played the matches to get out of that. Remember, the Los Angeles Gladiators played the Vancouver Titans very, very close in that first week. So Gladiators are not going to hang around there. And Dallas, who knows about Dallas, to be quite honest. It's looking interesting. It's looking interesting. But if I was to go to the Atlantic Conference, I think this is where it's really shaping up now. So you've got Philadelphia top, New York 2nd, Paris 3rd, London are currently 4th, Atlanta are 5th. I think Atlanta will leapfrog London, and then you will see London being a gatekeeper between the top 4, being the Philadelphia, New York, Paris, and Atlanta, and then the bottom, which is Boston, Washington, Toronto, Florida, Houston, and arguably London as well. I think London and Toronto, perhaps, could be those gateway teams between the top half of that Atlantic Conference and the bottom half of that Atlantic Conference. That's how it's shaping up at the moment, anyway. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. There is one last thing to cover. Next week, we see hero pools for the first time. We had the hero pool draw at the end of the week's matches on Sunday, and how it works is if those heroes have got more than 10% playtime during the past 2 weeks, they get the opportunity of being taken out of the rotation for the next week, and it's done purely by picking out of a drum. Well, that's how they did it this week anyway, and it's going to be interesting. So McCree, Widowmaker, Reinhardt, and Moira are banned next week. It's going to look very interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more Orisa. We're going to see a lot more Dive. I think this actually possibly works in Houston's favour. They can play more of that Hackfist. A lot less hit scan though, with McCree and Widowmaker being banned. This opens the options for Ashe and for Soldier, because they're the only really viable counters to Pharah, who could be quite dominant next week without a McCree or Widowmaker to counter them. So yeah, McCree has been very dominant and very influential in this meta right now. But without him, we're going to see a big shake-up, especially without Widow to fill his shoes. Moira, it's not really much. We're still going to probably see Lucio Anna, which is what we've been seeing anyway. Reinhardt, then we kind of like get the option of, well, some people might go Dive or some people might go Orisa Diva, which is possibly the other one as well. But it'll be interesting, and we'll do a further video on that at some point. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.